So, okay, so let's get started again. So what is a low wage LMIA? Low wage LMIA is a form of labor market impact assessment. What is a labor market impact assessment? A labor market impact assessment is an application that an employer has to do with the ESTC or Service Canada. Okay, that's the Labor Department in Canada. And normally, what the employer has to do is to show that they can't find a Canadian to do the job. Normally, they have to advertise and try to find Canadians first. Now, there are other kinds of LMIAs, such as the Global Talent Stream, for certain kinds of IT, STEM positions, where the employer doesn't have to do that. Okay. The low wage LMIA is therefore, like I said, there's lots of different categories. The low wage is a very specific category. And what it is, it's for people who, so the employers want to hire someone where the salary for that position is below the median wage, not for the occupation, but for the entire province. And it depends on the province, but normally it's around maybe the 28, 29 sort of mark. And these also change as well. So if an employer wants to hire someone under with the salary under that median wage for the province, and we are then they can apply for LMIA under this low wage LMIA. Now, there are other kinds of LMIAs. For example, there's another LMIA called LMIA supporting permanent residence. And so that is not included in this. And then the employer doesn't have to, we don't have to submit it under this. That's essentially what a low wage LMIA is. It's a specific form of the labor market impact assessment, and it's for people, employers who want to hire someone where the salary is below the median wage of the province.
Great. Okay. Then the next question is, so what are the changes that they've announced to this stream?
Okay, so there are two main changes. The first one is after September 26th, the government, for a period of time, is not going to process any more of the low wage LMIAs for communities where the unemployment rate is above 6%. Okay, so they're not going to process it at all. If it is above, it's below 6%, the employer is required to, it can only apply for someone who is under where the number of foreign workers that the employer has under the temporary foreign worker program is under the 10% cap. So basically, for anyone, an employer who has more than 10 employees, you look at how many temporary foreign workers you currently have in your company. And if you want to do another LMIA, for that worker plus the current ones that you have cannot exceed 10% of your entire workers in the company.
Okay, great. So what happens if someone has already submitted their LMIA and they're now waiting for a decision?
So if you already submitted your LMIA and it is under the low wage category, we are not 100% sure what's going to happen after September 26th if a decision has not been made. The government hasn't exactly stated. Based on what happened before, normally, when there is a rule change, if you submitted the application before a particular date, of change, when the government says they're going to change, then normally what happens is the application is still processed under the old rules. It's not a for sure thing where the government said they're going to make more announcements as the time goes by. But normally that's what's happened before.
Right. Great. And what should I do if I want to submit an LMIA after September 26th?
So, uh, come and see us, and we can certainly go through some options for you. If it is that you have a salary that is below the median wage of the province and you want to apply for LMIA, you could look at applying, for example, under the LMIA that supports permanent residence. Okay, that's not included in the employer is not subject to these kind of rules. We'll need to see if you qualify, but the problem with that one right now is that the processing times have stretched to right now, it's around 6 or 7 months. And, if the low wage LMIA is canceled or pretty much canceled after September 26th, I think there's going to be a lot more people applying under that the program supporting PR. And I think the backlogs are probably going to go even further for that. Of course, there may be other options other than the LMIA where we can look at how to apply for a work permit extension for you, permanent residence, etc. So do come. If this might be something that affects you, for sure, come and we'll see what are the other options for you.
Great. Okay. So the next announcement that was made was regarding the cancellation of the policy that allowed visitors to apply for work permits from inside of Canada. Could you tell us what this policy change means?
Right. So normally, since the regulations had been published in 2001, the rule is that if you are a visitor in Canada, you don't have a work permit, you don't have a study permit, for the most part, your first work permit, you can't apply inside Canada, okay? If you're just a visitor, your work permit, you can't apply inside Canada. Instead, you submit it normally to a visa post. It's not that you have to go personally to the visa post. It's just that the forms that are submitted, when you submit it online, it's not a work permit extension form. It's a work permit to work in Canada form. Okay, it's a different kind of form. And then we submit it online still. And you don't get an extension by doing that. You don't extend your status. You don't get implied status by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can also apply at the port of entry. Okay, so when COVID started, the government, because it was very difficult for people to leave the country and come back and go to the border, the government said, okay, we're going to allow visitors we're going to temporarily suspend this rule. And we're going to allow visitors to come and be in Canada, and then we're going to allow you to apply for your work permits in Canada. That doesn't mean that everybody can just go and apply for a work permit. You're a visitor. You, of course, have to qualify for the work permit. But it allowed you to file a work permit extension in Canada, so you had implied status and you could do that. Now the government has just announced that I think it was last week.
Mm-hmm.
Was it August 28th or 26th or something? Yeah, if you could.
28th, yeah.
Yeah, 28th. And so basically, if you submitted your application after that, you're no longer able to go under that temporary policy. It's back to the old rules where you have to normally apply for, if you're on a visitor status, apply for your work permit at a visa post or at the port of entry.
Okay. And are there any exceptions to that rule?
Yes, there are exceptions to the rule. So first of all, if you have a work permit or study permit, you can apply for your work permit inside Canada. Secondly, there are other exceptions where, for example, you are you have are a spouse. So open spousal work permits can be applied inside Canada. There's an exception for Americans and Mexican citizens where you can apply inside Canada as well. So these are some of the main exceptions to the normal rules. And of course, you can always go and flagpole. That's not counted as inside Canada. And it's not to say that you have to leave Canada in order to apply for your work permit. If you are a visitor in Canada, you can stay in Canada and we would submit your application online. Everybody submits their applications online. It's just that who evaluates it is not going to be normally sent to the Edmonton visa post. It's going to be sent to maybe the New York visa post or the visa post responsible for the country of your citizenship or other visa posts. If you apply online, you have to submit the right forms. You're not applying for the work permit extension form, extension of your stay in Canada. You're applying for the new work permit, work authorization work in Canada, and you're submitting that. And then once you get the work permit approved, if you're submitting it to the visa post, you don't get the work permit in the mail. You get a work permit approval letter. Just like if you were going to submit it outside of Canada at a visa post, you haven't come into Canada yet. So once you get that approval letter, you then have to go and activate your work permit. And you could do it at the port of entry, or you could leave Canada another way and come back and fly again and do that. They may want you to submit your passports for a visa if you don't already have a visa or your visa expired, etc. Okay. So yeah, so those are some of the exceptions, and this is how it works.
Great. And then how can you apply for a work permit if you are a visitor in Canada?
Right. So I just went through that. You're going to
Yeah.
apply online, submit the right forms, and then you'll need to activate it, or you could go to the port of entry, uh, and your flag pulling there. Certain work permits you can apply at the border, certain work permits you can't. So certainly, if you want to apply for a work permit, we're certainly here to help you out. Again, if you already have a work permit or study permit, for example, if you're here on a postgrad, you want to apply for your postgrad, you're here as a student, you can certainly still apply inside Canada.
Great. Thank you. Okay. And then next, the work permit extensions for people who are in P&P pools. What does this policy change mean?
Okay. So we've had so many policy changes in the last week. This is why we're doing this webinar. This is another change that even though the government announced it, we are still not sure of what the ramifications really mean. And the reason for that is because this involves the provincial governments. So what the federal government basically said is, we are going to allow those people who have a letter of support from the provincial nominee programs in each province, if you are in the expression of interest pools. So right now you can get a work permit if you have a provincial nomination. Okay, and you either get a support letter from the provincial, the province, or if you have an AOR, you can apply for a bridging work permit that way. Okay, but for those people who are still waiting in the pools to be selected, this is not express entry. This is for the provincial nominee pools. Okay, what happens to people there? And this really started. This policy really started with Manitoba. Manitoba provincial nominee programs, they were really, really, really backlogged, and people were there probably for a very long time. I've heard rumors about people being there for a year or so, and people weren't being selected. And so there was a lot of protests, and I think the Manitoba government reached out to the to the feds and said, "Hey, what do we do? Help us out." And so the minister had made this announcement that they were going to allow people who are in the expression of interest pools to allow them to extend their work permits. Now, what the federal government has done with this announcement is to say to the provinces, hey, this is your problem now. Okay. This is your problem now because you guys decide who you want to allow to extend their work permits. One of the logistical problems in allowing people who have not been selected yet for PMPs and who have not been determined that they are eligible for the provincial nominee programs is if you allow something like this, you will likely attract a lot of people who are just filing an application, even if they don't qualify, they put themselves into the pool, even if they might never be selected. They put themselves into the pool just so that they can extend their work permit. So the provinces now are in the midst of deciding, A, whether or not they even want to participate in this program, and B, what the rules are going to be.
Right. So you touched on it a little bit, but which province has said that they'll issue these letters?
As far as I know right now, only Manitoba has said that they are going to issue support letters on very limited basis.
Yep. And what kind of rules have they put out for those letters?
So they haven't said like all the rules right now. If you go to the website, they said more details to come. But they have said that it's only, first of all, for people who held the postgrad work permits and were in the Manitoba expression of interest pool before May 10th of this year. So if you didn't put your thing in, don't think that you can now extend your work permit by putting yourself into Manitoba's expression of interest. They did want to limit it to people who were in the pool before May 10th. I think that's when the minister had made the announcement that they were going to allow people to extend their work permits. Okay. I'm sure there's going to be more criteria for Manitoba as well. Guys, all of these things are so much in flux. If you have registered for our webinar, it's probably through our newsletter. If you aren't registered for our news blasts, we'll just automatically put you guys in there if you've registered for this webinar so that we can keep you guys updated on these kind of changes as we know them. But you know, I've added some of our social media handles. We're going to be doing a lot more in updates in our social medias as well. So feel free to add yourself there as well. All right, let's get to some questions.
Yes.
And guys, if you wanted to ask questions, please put them through the Q&A button as well.
Great. Okay. So I will start at the top here. So
Mhm.
can students work full-time instead of the proposed 24 hours till they find a co-op during their final term, which has no classes?
Okay, so right now it's still 20 hours. They haven't changed it to 24. They made an announcement that they want to, but until they actually do it, you can only limit it to 20 hours off campus based on your study permit. Okay? Co-op work permits only allow you to work in a job where it is integral to your studies. It is part of the co-op program. Let's say you did a co-op program for an employer and then later on the employer wants to keep you on working there. You cannot use your co-op work permit to allow you to work full-time for that employer after your co-op term has ended.
Great. Okay. Next, in a full-time job where the student has to finish their co-op hours first, are they required to take a short break after those hours to graduate, apply for postgrad work permit, and resume work on implied status, I think they mean? Is my understanding correct? The concern is the school will accept the full-time role, but their employer is willing to offer one to a student on a co-op work permit before they can eventually apply for the post-grad work permit.
Okay, so these questions relation to the postgrad work permit. Will you guys need, well, we've done a lot of webinars on how, when you can work and how you can work. I suggest that you could go to our YouTube site and check it out as to when you can work. You can only work for full time for your postgrad work permit uh, if you satisfy certain conditions after you finish your program.
Great. Yeah, and we do go into detail about
Yeah.
those other webinars. So I'll try to find some that are related to the current changes.
Yeah.
If an employer withdraws their LMIA and a file is in process, does that impact us? I imagine the applicant.
Well, yes. So it depends on what happens. So let's say you had filed the employer had filed the LMIA and it's still in process, it hasn't been decided yet, right? And then they say, oh no, I decided I want to do an LMIA. Then it certainly means that you wouldn't be able to get a work permit because your work permit has to be based on, or a work permit based on the LMIA, right? The work permit has to be based on an approved LMIA. If an employer has received a positive LMIA and has given it to you, and then the employer says, oh, you know what? I'm not going to want to support you in this LMIA anymore. I don't actually know why they would do that. That's a question that I would have.
Mhm.
Um, certainly if they tell the province that or the ESTC that they no longer want to proceed with the LMIA and the LMIA is canceled, then yes, if you haven't gotten your work permit yet and it's based on the LMIA, then you wouldn't get the LMIA. If you already received the LMIA work permit, and then the employer says, well, we don't want you to work with us anymore. Your work permit is still valid. You are able to be in Canada as a worker. However, because the LMIA work permit is employer specific, you wouldn't be able to work for anyone else unless you got another work permit. Okay? So you can stay in the country, but you can't work for anyone else unless you were able to get another work permit.
Okay, great. Um, are applicants still eligible to restore their status as a worker, such as through a bridging open work permit?
Uh, sorry, just could you say that again?
Yeah, so this one says, is the client still eligible to restore status as a worker? And then in brackets, bridging open work permit. So I imagine they're referring to, yeah.
Okay, so if you're talking about that policy where visitors can't apply for a work permit inside Canada, if you already have a work permit, you can apply to restore your status for the work permit. Or if you're applying, if you have a study permit, then you can apply to restore your status as a study permit inside Canada because restoration is inside Canada. So you can certainly do that. But you can't apply for as a visitor. If you're a visitor, you can't apply to restore your status to a work permit
Right.
anymore. Yeah.
I
Unless certain, like if you're just applying for open spousal work permit.
I think this also touches on a strategy I'm seeing a lot of people use right now, which is where they're ending their work permits. They're shifting to visitor status so they can stay and hopefully get an invitation to apply. And then they initially would have applied for the bridging open work permit from inside of Canada based on submitting their PR. That has been affected by the new change, right?
Hmm. Yes, and also the bridging work permit, normally you would apply for it if you can qualify only if you have a work permit. So strategy wise, if I had a work permit it's about to expire, I think I might get an invitation to apply any day now. I probably would file the extension for a work permit inside Canada.
Mhm.
Uh, and hopefully I might get the work permit and keep myself in employee status, keep on working. And hopefully if I get an invitation to apply, I could update my application
Hmm.
and to qualify for the bridging work permit.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Let me just see. Next question. These are mostly post-grad questions.
And guys, I understand that these postgraduate work permit questions may affect you a lot. It's just that there's a lot of information about postgrad work permits. I'd have to do a whole other half an hour of presentation on that. So what I suggest that you guys do is go to the YouTube website or our website. We do a lot of presentations for schools and go in there. And if you want us to come to your school and do a free presentation for you guys, for students, we're happy to do that as well. Just shoot us an email.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of
Um,
course, come for a consultation. We are offering anyone who has watched this presentation a discounted rate. You have to just let us know you've attended our webinar. And our discounted consultation fee is $100. Normally it's $150. Okay, so do come for a consultation if you want to talk about your own personal circumstances.
okay. Next question. Does the work permit have a maximum duration after which it can't be extended? And if so, how many years is the limit?
Work permits depends on the category. Some work permits can be issued 1 year at a time. Some work permits can be issued 2 years at a time. Some work permits are issued at 3 years. 3 years usually the max for the duration of a work permit. But it really depends on the category. And some work permits cannot be extended based on the same category. For example, postgrad work permits. You can extend your work permit for another postgrad work permit. And so it just really depends on the category.
Okay. What will happen to the people that are working right now in a low-wage LMIA-based work permit? Can they extend that work permit?
That's a very good question. So if you're on your work permit right now, you can certainly work until the expiry date. Now, whether you can or, you know, how can you get another work permit? That really depends on your circumstances. For a lot of people who are on the low wage work permits, it would be prudent for the most part to look at a plan as to how you might be able to get permanent residence. So certainly come to us and we can see what we can do for you.
Great. Um, I'm trying to understand this one. Have there been any updates or changes to the use of ROs with different passports? I'm not sure what RO means.
Have there been any updates, changes for different passports? Rec
Residency obligations?
um,
RO.
not sure. Maybe if you can come
Yeah.
in,
I-
write in and say, yeah, what you mean.
Okay. Um, okay. Can you clarify who can flagpole to activate a work permit as the Canadian government discourages some to do so?
Right. So there are certain work permits that you can apply at the border, and they're trying to limit the number of work permits that you can't. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but some of the work permits that you cannot apply at the border anymore are postgrad work permits, startup visa work permits, bridging work permits. I think those are all I can think of right now, but like I said, don't hold me to it, okay? Um, then borders right now, the popular borders, most of the popular borders now have restrictive timing. And in BC, also, some of the borders have said that you need to go and register for an interview beforehand. So, flag polling is certainly not an easy thing to do. That being said, if you have applied for your work permit, let's say you're a visitor in Canada, you've applied for your work permit at the visa post and you've received a letter of approval letter, and you need to activate the work permit. That in and of itself is not counted as flag polling. Okay, very important. So why is this important? It's because remember how I said there are times and restrictions for the borders? Like, for example, in the Niagara region, you can only go in flagpole Tuesdays to Thursdays. Well, if you have letter that's or approved for your work permit, you can go any time of the day, any day of the week, and go and activate your work permit because that's not counted as flag polling. It's counted as flag polling if you are applying for your work permit at the first instance. You've never received an approval letter from the visa post.
Great. Okay. Oh, someone's asking what our YouTube channel name is. I think it's right here on the slide.
Here on the slide at Long Mangoji LLP 7172. We are rebranding our law firm name to LM Law Group. But yeah, it's right now that's the handle right there.
And yeah, on our website too, we have lots of the different seminars that you can check out.
Yeah.
So here's one. So if someone came as a visitor and applied for a work permit back in February, will they be affected by the new announcement?
Yes, if you do want to apply for a work permit in Canada and you have not yet applied for your work permit before the announcement that was made last week, then yes, you cannot apply. The old rules now are in place. And if you wanted to apply for the work permit, you would have to adhere to those rules that I explained.
But if they had submitted it before the change, they would still be processed under the old rules, right?
That's right, for your work permit, not just because you entered as a visitor before those rules.
Yeah, great. Okay, if a person's work permit is expiring in a month and is still waiting for the LMIA application outcome, can we apply for a work permit stating that the reason is that the LMIA is already in process?
Yes. So in general, I don't want to go into specific cases. There are different exceptions all the time to the rule. But in general, you, if it was my clients, I would always want to keep them in status. And I would want to file the work permit extension for someone before their work permit expires, even if I don't have a LMIA. We file the work permit extension to keep you in status. And right now, it's taking around 4 months, 119 days, last time I checked, for a work permit extension to be decided in Canada. So if an officer has not gone to your application, you have that period of time to try to get your LMIA and then try to update your application before the officer gets to your application. And then once the officer gets to your application, then they can, if they see the LMIA in there, they would likely approve it. Also, there is a policy by IRCC. Sometimes they follow it, sometimes they don't. But they're supposed to follow it where they are supposed to, an officer is supposed to keep the application open for 60 days if they see that LMIA was already submitted and it's just that the decision has not been made. There has been a push for IRCC government to the department to try to extend that policy because right now the LMIAs, some of them are taking 7, 8 months to process. So 60 days, which was the previous normal processing time, is not enough and not fair for people to do that. So we'll see how that goes, but at least you can buy yourself some time if you file your work permit extension before your current work permit expires to be on implied status until a decision is made. And by the way, there is a big misconception in the community where people, you know how you get that letter after you submit a work permit extension from the government that says, oh, you have the legal authorization to work until a certain date, okay? This letter is not a temporary approval letter, okay? A lot of people think, oh, this is an e-approval. They call it e-approval. This is not it. There's no approval letter for this. This letter is just a letter that you can use to go to OHIP to try to extend your OHIP. You can show it to your employer if they don't really understand immigration laws. It's official. It helps them, feel satisfied that you can work in the meantime, okay? But even if you don't get that letter and you satisfy the conditions, you are allowed to work on implied status until a decision is made. The other problem I have with this letter is that it makes it seem they put a random date, like a 6 months date on there, and it makes it seem like you would lose your status if your decision is not made by this random date. That is not true. You have status until a decision is made on your application. You have implied status. Okay, there's even a IRCC website that says, "Don't worry about this date. You can work until you have a decision is made." But my pet peeve with this letter is it's so confusing, and it kind of makes it seem like you would lose status if you don't get a decision by that date, which is not true.
Okay, great. Um, this
All
is,
right.
oh yeah, go ahead.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, I lost you there for a second. I think you're back
No,
now.
I was just looking at the time. We still have another, we're going to go until 1 o'clock. So we still have some time left. So if you have questions, keep them coming.
So here's another one. So as an open work permit holder, this is maybe more of an opinion question. Do you think that Canadian companies are going to prioritize citizens and permanent residents when offering a job, or there's no distinction based on their status during the hiring process?
I mean, I really, it really depends on the employers, but one of the main things that employers are concerned with is A, how long can you work with them if they hire you? And number two, what do they need to do to help you get your permanent residence or extend your work permit once your work permit expires? So those questions may be of concern to not only the employer, but also yourself, right? Because more and more now, people will need to have employers to support them with the provincial nominee programs that are employer based, or LMIAs maybe. I generally love to speak with people who are in the job hunting process, where we kind of go through some of their options to get permanent residence. Once you know what your options are, then when you speak with an employer, you can tell them. And if you want, you can give them my information, and I'm happy to talk to them as well. Uh, but also, you yourself may not want to go with an employer if you need help later on who tells you at the interview, I am absolutely not going to help you do any of this LMIA or any of this provincial nominee program. You're on your own. Because then you're probably going to be wasting your time working for them.
That's great to know. Another kind of, well, sort of opinion question is how do you think the LMIA and healthcare occupations are going to be affected by the new policy?
So I believe the healthcare is an exception to that low wage. Healthcare, agriculture, I believe, are exceptions that they have said to the low wage. Healthcare occupations are very interesting because the government, both on a federal basis and the provincial basis, have really identified these occupations as something in need. And so there are quite a lot of permanent residence programs that can help with healthcare. So if you're in healthcare, it's really vital that you take a look at um, how you can get on that pathway to permanent residence, and then also look at where it's easiest for you to go. Because right now, if you're in healthcare, you probably do have a lot of options as to which employer you want to work for.
Great. What if you get your LMIA and you want to apply for your work permit? If you're on a visitor record now, can you apply for the work permit at the border?
That's a good question. Yes, if you have valid status in Canada, you may be able, if your visitor status is still, you still have a visitor record and it hasn't expired yet, you may be able to flagpole at the border. Um, not, it would really depend on your circumstances as to whether or not I recommend it, but yes, that is an option.
Okay, great. And then someone's just looking kind of for a summary. So in a nutshell, the policies regarding postgrad work permits for international students and their spouses remain the same in light of the visitor changes, I think is what they're saying.
In light of the visitor changes, yes. There's still the visitor changes have not really changed those policies yet. Of course, there have been certain changes to postgrad work permits, and the length of postgrad work permits for masters, for example, you can get there 3 years now. There will be more changes coming up, guys, and we can certainly we'll certainly keep you guys updated through our news blasts. Look at our social media, and maybe if there are a lot of changes, we'll have another webinar like this for you
Yeah.
guys.
Okay, someone's asking they have an OINP application, but they've not received an invitation and their work permit's going to expire in April. Can they apply for an extension under the new program?
So far, the news that we have from the Ontario government for the OIMP is that they are in discussions with the feds as to whether or not they want to sign up with this program. So right now, you wouldn't be able to get an extension because you need that support letter from the province. So if the province is not going to give you a support letter right now, you're not able to file an extension. Will you be able to do it by April? Stay tuned and we'll see on that.
Great. Okay. I'm just looking through here. Lots of postgrad and co-op questions. Let's see. Do you have any ideas if more restrictions are going to be coming later for people who want to come to Canada, or any thoughts on what you think is coming?
Um, I think that it's coming up to election year. And I certainly think there's a lot of scapegoating right now happening with international workers. First, they invited you guys to come and work and say, hey, come over, we need you guys. And now as unemployment rates rise and there's a housing issue, you guys are all being scapegoated and you guys are all being blamed for all the problems that this government has created themselves. As to whether or not I think the rules may change, I think rules are all constantly changing. Immigration is one of the fastest changing laws in Canada, and it's so political. And as we come to an election year, I think there will be more changes. If the Conservatives get elected, absolutely there's going to be more changes. What are these changes? That's anybody's guess right now. What I would suggest to you guys are these things. If you qualify for permanent residence, if you have a good chance to get permanent residence, don't waste time. Do it while the rules are there that will allow you to do it. Okay, don't waste time. Other things that you can do if you don't qualify yet, come for a consultation. We can certainly look at how to increase your chances to qualify. With regard to things that are good for permanent residents, things that are helpful for permanent residents are certainly work in in-demand fields. Okay, so for example, it might be easier for you to immigrate if you have a job as a truck driver, for example, than in a lot of other professions sometimes. Or if you have a job in healthcare, those kind of things are important. Don't forget about your spouses. If you have a common law spouse or you lived with someone for a year, or if you've been married to them, if you're studying, for example, they get their open work permits. So you can team up as a family. French is huge right now. The government has this policy right now to really attract French speakers. So even if you, for example, there's a francophone work permit where even if you can just speak and listen, not read or write, just speak and listen to the level of 5, CLB level of 5, you can get a work permit if you have any job outside of Quebec, basically. And so these kind of things, these kind of nuanced things, there's a lot of free trade agreements that are not going to be changed easily because that's a free trade agreement is a negotiation between countries. And so those kind of things for professionals, a lot of professionals from countries like US, Mexico, Peru, Colombia, Australia, Japan, European Union, UK, and the list goes on. If you come over and we can take a look if the free trade agreement applies to you and you might be able to get a work permit that's LMIA exempt. And there's a lot of different kinds of LMIAs. For example, global talent stream, where the employer doesn't have to undergo recruitment, and we can just get a work permit because of your they're negotiating a labor market benefit plan. There's so many different kinds of things that we can do. Come for, and we can certainly do a plan for you guys.
Great. If a visitor record holder applies for a work permit doing the outside Canada application form, does
Mhm.
this work permit application give maintained status? Because, yeah, they had some confusion.
Yeah, so if you are applying as a visitor, if you're a visitor in Canada and you apply for a work permit now at the visa post, that does not give you implied status because it's an application, it's not an extension of your status in Canada, it's an application to go outside of Canada. So if your visitor status is about to expire and you don't have a decision yet on your work permit, you can file an extension of your visitor status in Canada and keep yourself in status if you wanted to stay in Canada.
Great. Someone's just asking for you to reiterate how much is considered low income.
It really depends, and there's a chart online. It really depends on what the government states is the median wage in a province. Um, every province has their own median wage, and these wages are subject to change as well based on the latest government surveys. I don't know exactly for each province, but right now it's around the $28-29
Mhm.
range for a lot of provinces.
Great. Okay. Someone's asking just for clarification about the discount. So they're wondering through the Devant webinars if the discounts essentially add together to make it $50 and how long the
Yeah,
consult.
no, just one discounted rate. So Comfort, it's $100 if you're eligible for a discounted webinar.
Great.
If you came to like three webinars or two webinars, I can't give you. If we add it on, I'd have to give you money. So no, it's all the same. Yeah, one discounted rate. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any idea about the backlogs for LMIA applications under the PR stream?
So right now, what they're saying is if your application has been in there for over the 25 week, you can ask for them to put out a note on it, and hopefully someone will get to it. I suspect this timeline is going to rise dramatically after the low wage policy is in place by September 26th. It may already be rising because we don't know if people put their applications in before September 26th, whether or not, it's grandfathered in. Likely it will be, but who knows? But certainly after September 26th, I expect the backlog to go even further.
Yeah. Okay. Um, let's see what else here. Some questions I'm not sure how that one applies though. Just reading through a few.
Oh, someone has asked, does this change apply to Iranian visitors as well? No, I'm sorry. That's one of the exceptions to the rule. So for a lot of these humanitarian work permits, the rules that apply to Iranian work permits, Ukrainian work permits, Gaza work, and the list goes on. They are for people who are visitors in Canada, and you can apply inside Canada still for your work permits according to those rules.
Great. Okay. Um, let's see what else we've got here. And
Someone wanted to ask if they could apply for a visitor visa after they receive their postgrad work permit.
yeah, so you can apply for a visitor visa after you receive your postgrad work permit. So the postgrad work permit gives you status here in Canada as a worker, but it doesn't allow you to leave and enter the country. So you will need to apply for a multiple entry visitor visa to be able to travel essentially while you're on your postgrad work permit.
It's called a temporary resident visa, TRV. Okay. And so the visas, like Mary was saying, is very different from a visitor status. So if you want to apply for visitor status, that means you're a visitor in Canada, you have status to stay. If you want to travel, you apply for the TRV, temporary resident visa. You can go travel to the US and come back. You don't need a TRV if that's all you're going to do. But if you are from a visa requiring country, you want to travel outside of Canada and US, you want to come back again, you need the TRV. Normally, we suggest that you apply for the TRV extension after you get your work permit because normally the length of the visas is dependent on when your work permit expires. So let's say you don't have your postgrad work permit yet. You want to go and apply for a visa. They may not issue it to you for very long or they may not issue it to you at all until you have your postgrad work permit. Once you have your postgrad work permit for 3 years, you then apply for your visa and it'll be normally issued for the 3-year period of time.
Great. I think someone's asking for clarification about one of the things you were saying earlier regarding updating the application. So how do you update an application? What does that mean?
Right. So normally you would update the application by submitting your information through the online web form.
Great. Thank you. Let's see here.
Okay, we have time for one last question. Pick a good one, Mary.
Great. Let's see here. Okay. I think this one will do a good summary of kind of everything. So someone was wondering, is it that after September 24th, visitors can't apply for work permits inside of Canada?
All right, so let's get this straight. The announcement for this cancellation of the rule where visitor status can apply in Canada was it August
It's
20,
August 28th.
28?
Yeah, so that was effective immediately.
Yeah, so it's happening immediately. So anybody who has not submitted their application on August 27th, you're out of luck. You cannot apply inside Canada anymore. The September 26th is for the low wage LMIA that the government has said they're no longer going to process the low wage LMIs in places where the unemployment rate is above 6%. And if it's under 6%, the employer is subject to the cap of 10%.
Great. I think that clarifies that question.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. And thank you for your amazing questions as well.
Yeah. So if you have anything else you want to discuss with us, please feel free to reach out, follow us on social media, register for the newsletter, or yeah, just send us an email if you have questions and we'd be happy to help.
And I just wanted to let you guys know, it's a tough world out there, and I'm sorry to say that, the governments have been getting very political about these policies that help your lives. I do want to encourage you guys to not give up. There is still a lot of things to do. And the country really needs you and people such as yourself who help to build our economy, build our communities. And you've contributed so much already. And we want to help you guys find a way to stay. All right. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.